Welcome into the Slobberknocker Sports Podcast, and today I'm going to be doing a quick breakdown on why I think the Texas Longhorns are going to be playing for a national championship on January the 8th. And we'll look at this matchup. It's the Sugar Bowl college football semifinal as Texas takes on Washington in Louisiana in the Superdome down in New Orleans. This is a rematch of the Alamo Bowl from last year where the Longhorns fell to the Huskies 20-27. Currently, the Huskies are a 3.5 to 4 point dog in this game, which is close to the exact line that we saw in the Alamo Bowl last year. We've seen this line trickle out to as high as 4.5 for the Longhorns. We see it sitting now at 3.5 to 4, depending on the shop. Total sitting at 63.5. So we're going to see a lot of points in this game, according to Vegas. Kalen DeBoer, that is, the head coach of Washington, as an underdog, has been pretty darn good the last couple years. Last year in 2022, as a 12-point dog, they took on the Oregon Ducks and won that game outright. Last year in the Alamo Bowl, the Huskies won as a 4-point dog. This year, a short 1-point dog against Oregon State and Corvallis, won outright, and obviously won against Oregon in their second matchup as a 10-point underdog in the Pac-12 championship game this season. Texas comes into this game as the Big 12 champions, the first time the Longhorns have won their conference title since 2009, back when Colt McCoy was slinging it around the yard, a year that the Longhorns went to the BCS National Championship and fell to the Crimson Tide after McCoy went down with an injury early in that one. Longhorn fans remember that. Otherwise, Texas may have a second national championship this century. Sark, on his coaching staff, has 15 games of experience in the college football playoff. Kyle Flood, Jeff Banks, and Bo Davis all have experience coaching in college football playoff games. All had time with Bama. Washington, on the other hand, 13 wins this season, a school record. Fourth undefeated record in school history, and the first time they've been undefeated since 1991. So let's start with the two teams' resumes. Texas, in my opinion, wins the resume battle relatively easily. So obviously they have the better non-conference win, going to Tuscaloosa and beating Alabama, arguably the best win overall this season for any college football team. Won that game by double digits against Alabama. On the other side, Washington's best non-conference win was against Michigan State, who missed a bowl game this year. So not a very good non-conference schedule. They beat Boise State as well, who won the Mountain West, but obviously Boise State not a Power 5 team and not that talented. And then you look at Washington's schedule after the Oregon win, a game that many think Oregon was the better team for most of the game. They really struggled following that game. Trailed 7-6 late against a terrible Arizona State team. Essentially, they had not scored an offensive touchdown. They did not score an offensive touchdown the entirety of that game. They scored multiple field goals early, trailed 7-6 late in the fourth quarter. Arizona State was inside the 10-yard line of Washington. This game was in Seattle, and Washington had forced a fourth down and short. Instead of kicking the field goal in a game where Washington's offense looked anemic, Kenny Dillingham decided to go for it, and on that play, a pick six for Washington, took it to the house, ended up winning the game 15-7, did not score an offensive touchdown in that game, won a very ugly game against arguably the worst team in the Pac-12. They were really, really bad. Lost to Colorado earlier in the year. Followed up that game with a near loss to Stanford. Right? They were tight, if not trailing, for a large portion of that game. Late in the game, Penix threw a really bad interception when Washington was going in to put the game away, already up one score. I believe they were up 5. And then on the final drive, Stanford had a wide-open receiver on a fourth down that could have easily been a touchdown, and the kid missed the throw. Those are two games that very well Washington could have lost. They beat a very average Utah team who was up and down and obviously didn't even have their starting quarterback all season. They snuck that one out at home in a game that was tight throughout. They trailed much of the first half in that one. Had a shootout with a USC team that looked awful the second half of the season. Could not get a stop against that USC offense. I believe USC put up close to 50 points in that matchup. They played Oregon State close in Corvallis. I'm not going to hold that against them. That's a tough place to play. But then Wazoo, the final game of the season. I know it's a rivalry game, but that Wazoo team is not a bowl team. and you essentially play them to a draw the entirety of the game. It takes a big fourth down conversion on their own side of the field to even set up a game-winning field goal, which they were able to knock in and walk it off and win their division to the Pac-12, or win the regular season Pac-12 title, rather. And I understand if you look at the other side, right? Texas, they had some close games of their own, right? They played Kansas State extremely close. They played Houston close. They played TCU close late in the season. However, I'd argue two things about those, and this is why I think there's a little bit of a difference between the two. And that's the fact that against that ranked K-State team at home, Texas was playing with a backup quarterback who essentially couldn't throw the ball, right? Same thing in the second half of Houston when Texas blew that lead and ended up, squeaking it out. They didn't have Quinn Ewers. He went down in that Houston game. So two of those three close games came late. And the third game against TCU, Quinn was 70% at best coming off the sprained AC joint, couldn't throw the ball all that accurately. We've seen Quinn Ewers at a healthy mark later in the year, and it's much different than what we saw in that game. And still, the thing is, in all three of those games, Texas dominated those games for 3 full quarters, and they just pulled a Texas, which is choking the game away late. So to me, it's like, okay, you've got a team who is basically dominating the majority of these football games and then giving it away late, still finding ways to win. It's a little different than playing teams for an entirety of a game to a draw, being down most of the game, like the Huskies were at Arizona State. To me, I think Texas' resume is significantly better. Obviously, they have the one loss at OU, but that's a rivalry game. Overall resume advantage goes to Texas. That's why Texas is in the playoffs, right, with one loss, and that's why Washington essentially had no margin for error. If Washington loses a game in the regular season or loses the Pac-12 championship game, they have no shot to get in, right? That's why this Texas team is favored by 4 points, and that's why Washington was a 10-point dog against an Oregon team who they beat 7 weeks prior to that matchup. Looking at this matchup here, we'll start with the Texas offense versus the Washington defense, and I think this is the biggest mismatch of the game. Obviously, Texas, without their star running back Jonathan Brooks, he was second in the nation in rushing when he was injured with a torn ACL earlier in the season. It was late in the year, but earlier, about 2 months ago now from the time we're recording this. Washington plays a bend-but-don't-break style of defense. They've been better as of late for sure, had some good performances later in the year, definitely played offenses that weren't as good later in the year, and that, I believe, played a part in it. And Texas, on the other hand, wants to spread you out, wants to get the ball to their athletes in space and let them work. They push the ball down the field with Ewers. They throw lots of screen passes, and they still had a pretty good run game, even with the loss of Brooks in the last 3 games. So who has the edge? As I said, this is a big mismatch here in terms of Texas' offense versus Washington's defense. The massive edge goes to Texas, right? Washington has the worst unit of any team in the college football playoff, meaning if you look at the offense or the defense for each team, right, their defense is dead last of those 8 units, right? The Alabama offense, defense, Michigan offense, defense, Texas offense, defense, Washington offense, defense. Washington's defense ranks 8th among those 8 units, right? Their stop unit's not very good. They're 66th in yards per play allowed, 93rd in yards per game allowed. Their advanced metrics are a little bit better. They were 25th in defensive EPA. Scoring defense was okay because of late. But again, when they played better teams, Oregon, right, it was a shootout in the first one. Even in the second one, Oregon put up a decent amount of points. And my issue with this Washington defense especially is their lack of ability to get pressure. So they've got one guy who consistently gets pressure for them, and that's Braylon Trice. Can he get a pass rush against Texas's offensive line? Because all year, in the entirety of the season, Washington has 19 sacks as a team, and 5 of those came in one game, right? So take away that one game, they're averaging about 1 sack per game. So Washington has not gotten pressure on the quarterback all year. If you don't get pressure on Quinn Ewers, he can be elite. He's not great under pressure. He does make stupid decisions at times. But if you give him time to throw to those wide receivers in space, good luck. I don't see how they get stops here, and I don't think they're going to get pressure. And that would be my biggest concern if I was Washington's defense. Like, if I can't get pressure, what are we going to do here? And I don't see that that's going to happen. Second big issue for Washington. They are horrific tackling in space. They've missed 149 tackles this season. That's the 8th most at the Power 5 level. So of all the Power 5 teams, which is over 60 teams, they're the 8th worst tackling team. And you have athletes in that Texas receiving core, even in the backfield still, who are going to be a difficult task to tackle. Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, Jatavion Sanders, Jordan Whittington. You've got all these guys. You got C.J. Baxter, the 5-star freshman running back who's filled in well. Jalen Blue's run well as well in the secondary back role. And even Keelan Robinson, who's played some. He returns kicks. He plays some in the backfield as well. He led them in rushing their last game against Texas Tech. The last game against Oklahoma State. Questions for Texas on the health side. Xavier Worthy was in a walking boot in that conference title game against Oklahoma State. I do think it was a good sign that he came out onto the sideline. If it was a major injury, I believe he would have been, back there getting treatment or obviously going, somewhere else to get a second opinion. But the x-rays were negative according to Sark, and we have to take Sark at his word. He said earlier this couple weeks ago that Worthy was practicing and looked good. I mean, the good thing is, assuming Sark is not lying and that the x-rays were negative, you had 30 days off between games here, right? So 30 days off for a high ankle sprain, even if it was severe, which I don't think it was all that severe, I think he'll be close to 100% here. But back real quick to that pass rush. You look at Texas' O-line. They're a super talented group. They're young, and coming into the year, I think there were some question marks of whether they would be elite this year. Maybe they were a year or two away from being really, really good. A lot of underclassmen on that O-line. But, man, they were really, really good. According to Pro Football Focus, their pass blocking was 4th in the nation. They were 3rd in pressure rate allowed. And, you pair that with what we just talked about with Washington's front. And, I don't think Washington is going to bring tons and tons of blitzes. If they do, Texas is going to hit short routes with their wide receivers and run all over a depleted secondary when you have multiple guys in the box or rushing. So I just don't see how Washington gets consistent stops here, right? If you can't get pressure on Ewers, if you are having to commit more people to, getting pressure on the quarterback, I don't see a path here. You basically are going to have to hope that you can get natural pressure and hold up in the secondary, because I just don't see a path here for getting a lot of stops if you're Washington. Texas is going to move the ball like they've done all year. One key for Texas's offense, and this is one way Washington stays in the game. They are a bend but don't break defense, like I mentioned earlier. Texas has had trouble finishing drives this season, right? That's where we've seen them struggle, inside the green zone, right? Inside the 40-yard line of the opponent is where they have had their issues, and it's largely because of Steve Sarkisian's situational play calling. He's a great schemer. He's a great play caller overall, but in these situational spots where they get inside the red zone, inside the green zone, and they're having to, make third down calls or decide whether to go for it, he's not made the right decision a lot of the time, and this is going to be key for this game. If Washington can hold Texas to some field goals and Washington can get some stops on 4th down, as I assume Texas is going to go for some short 4th downs in this one, that's going to give them a shot to stick in the game. If Texas is able to convert 3rd downs, stay out of 4th down, and not kick field goals, this is going to be a tough matchup for Washington to win. But again, you look at it from the team that beat Texas this year, Oklahoma, right? What did Oklahoma do from a defensive standpoint that kept them in the game? They picked off Quinn Ewers. How'd they do that? They got some pressure on him. They confused him with some different looks. That's what Washington has to do. Has to get pressure, has to force Quinn into some mistakes, which he's prone to do. If you can get turnovers like they did, you have a shot. Then you think about the final drive of the game for Texas, right? Same thing we just talked about, stalling inside the 40-yard line. Texas had a 1st and 5 at the OU 35-yard line with under 2 minutes to go. The play calling after that was Sark called a pass on 1st down. Ewers was sacked for a 3-yard loss. He called a pass, short screen pass to Xavier Worthy on 2nd down and 13, 3-yard gain back to 3rd and 10, and then he played it super conservative on 3rd down, ran the ball with Jonathan Brooks up the middle for 6 yards, settled for a 47-yard field goal to take a 3-point lead, forced Oklahoma to use their final timeout of the game, and the result was Oklahoma got the ball back with over a minute 15 to go and only needing a field goal to tie. We know what happened. Obviously, OU went the length of the field and scored a touchdown with just under 20 seconds to go in the game. And, that's a game that, or a team, rather, that is somewhat similar to Washington. That I would have a little bit of a concern as a Texas fan if I was thinking about the two teams, or the team that they lost to earlier this year compared to this team. They're relatively similar, right? Fast-paced offense, heavily pass oriented. They like to push the ball downfield. I think Washington has better receivers. I think Oklahoma has, maybe the better scheme offensively. I think Oklahoma probably plays faster than Washington, which benefits them because that's where Texas tends to struggle. We'll get to that in a minute. But, I think overall there's just a big mismatch here. I think Texas's offense might be the best offense of these four groups. I think Texas has really shown, especially as of late. You look at trend lines, right? Texas has trended really well offensively. They're playing their best football as of late. And that correlates with Quinn Ewers' health, right? He's been healthy as of late, so they've looked really good, right? Xavier Worthy is healthy, and they have their full complement of receivers with Whittington, with Worthy, with A.D. Mitchell. They've got their tight end, Jatavion Sanders. He was banged up for a lot of the year. He got 30 days off. He's going to be healthy. I think they're going to be able to move the ball here. I think they're going to be able to run the ball here. They haven't really dropped off a ton. It's been more by committee since Jonathan Brooks went out with the ACL tear. But Xavier Worthy, or rather, C.J. Baxter, Keelan Robinson, Jalen Blue, all had a game where they led the team in rushing since Jonathan Brooks went out. So they've had consistent success on the ground despite losing Brooks, and that's a credit to the offensive line and the scheme Texas runs. Moving on to the other side, we'll look at the Washington offense versus the Texas defense. I don't think there's nearly as big of a gap here. You look at it, right? Michael Penix, the quarterback for Washington, Heisman candidate, had a great start to the season. Had a few injuries or nicks late in the year, and he just didn't look all that great to me. I know he was still a Heisman finalist, but if you're a football guy and you watch football, you can see his inaccuracy was apparent late in the season. He did not throw the ball accurately like he did early in the year. Really, even you go back to the first Oregon matchup, he missed some really big throws late in that game. I know he made the game-winning touchdown throw late. It was kind of a jump ball. But in the final drive where they had a chance to kind of salt the game away, they could not get a first down, and Penix kept missing throws because the issue with him is he's really good in play action. He's really good in quick throws. He's not great when he has to drop back and be a passer. We'll touch on that again here in a second. Dylan Johnson, the running back for Washington, he was hobbled by an injury late in the year, not 100%. Obviously, we know Jalen McMillan, one of their star wide receivers for Washington, missed a lot of the year. He came back and was outstanding in the conference title game. He looked like their best receiver. They've got a Duzne on the outside as well. They've got a complement of three NFL wide receivers. And it's going to be a challenge for Texas to stop those guys with their secondary. They're super explosive, right? They like the big play, but they haven't been as explosive as of late. And then when you look at the Texas defense, where they make their money is up front, right? Their best two pass rushers are interior linemen and their run stuffers, Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat. Those two guys are absolute studs. They're NFL guys, and they have been game wreckers all year. They have single-handedly won games for Texas. I mean, Byron Murphy single-handedly won the Kansas State game in overtime on fourth down, getting to the quarterback and basically causing the play to explode early on before they could even get a look to the end zone. But the other thing about it is you look at the Washington offensive line, and they are going to have to be really, really good against that front. Because if Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy can get pressure, if they can get pressure on the outside with some really good DNs as well, Michael Penix is going to have a tough day. That offensive line has been pretty decent. But, with the amount I think Washington's going to have to throw here, they're going to have to be elite, right? That Washington offensive line has not been good. We'll touch on them here in a second. As well, but let's just talk real quick schematically, right? Listen to Ryan Grubbs, the OC, talk about game plan in his presser the other day, and I didn't really like that he talked about wanting to consistently run the football. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. You're just not going to do it on Texas. They're the best rush defense in the country. Metrically, I think they're maybe like third, but the reality is nobody runs on Texas, and better running teams have tried and failed. Kansas State was an offense averaging 270 yards rushing per game. They came into that game and tried to run the ball in Texas, and they essentially, by the third quarter, had to just abandon it. And that's the problem with teams who try to run on Texas is they try, and they try, and they try, and they continuously fail, and then when it's too late, they try to abandon it and throw. Now, Texas had some struggles defending those throws late in those games, which is why those games ended up being close late. But I think if Washington comes out here and tries to run the ball and establish the run, that's a big mistake. I don't see that as a good path for Washington. The way they're going to have to beat Texas is protecting Penix and throwing the ball downfield. If they can do that, that's going to give them a shot. You try to run on Texas, good luck. I mean, they're elite against the run. When you look at the other side, right, Washington obviously has an advantage against Texas' secondary. Texas is 75th in schedule-adjusted EPA per pass, right? They're prone to giving up the explosive play. The one thing Texas secondary has going for them in this matchup is I don't think Washington has seen corners or a secondary that's nearly this physical. And you heard Ryan Grubbs in that conference talk about that physicality and how important it's going to be for Washington to get off their secondary routes and break open. Yeah, we will likely see some secondary flags against Texas. That's how they play. But if Texas is able to bother Washington's big receivers with their physicality, they're going to be in trouble. Again, the theme here is if Texas does this, Washington's going to be in trouble. If Washington can't do this, Texas is going to give them a lot of trouble. So, there's a lot of spots here where Washington's going to have to, win 5 or 6 different areas to have a shot here. And I think Texas is going to have to win 2 or 3 of those areas to have a really good chance to run away with this one. So, you look at Washington as a whole. Offensively, we talked about the offensive line a bit. I want to touch on them one more time. And we'll start with this. There's 3 main issues, in my opinion, for Washington in the offensive matchup versus Texas. Number 1, Texas has been really good at stopping the pass against teams that don't play fast, right? Washington's tempo has been significantly slower since the Oregon game. They have become a much different offense, right? They've started to play slower, more deliberate. They're not playing ultra fast pace. I'm not sure why they've gone away from it. Maybe it had to do with the health of the team. Maybe it had to do with the fact that their defense was playing so poorly that going that fast, keeps them off the field for much shorter periods and they get burnt out quicker. Unfortunately, I think that's the path here. I think Washington has to play faster because, like I said, that's what Texas does. That's what they do. When they get tired and they burn out, they give up explosive passes. We saw it against Kansas State when they just abandoned the run and started throwing late. We saw it against Oklahoma. The fast pace, especially late in the first half, late in the game, that fast-paced offense gave Texas problems. They got tired. Their pass rushers get exhausted. Their linebackers get tired in coverage. And so I think they're going to have to play fast to have a shot here. Because in the course of a regular game without a lot of tempo, I actually think the pass defense is significantly better than people think. Number 2, Washington's pass protection. Like I said, the offensive line. They have been pretty good against Pac-12 teams. What about against this front? What about against Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat and those defensive ends for Texas and Jalen Ford coming on blitzes? Can they pick up some timely blitzes from Texas? Can they protect against that? Really, it's an NFL style front, right? They're just physical as all could be up there, and they get a lot of pressure. If Washington allows those guys to be game breakers, good fucking luck. It's going to be fucking difficult for them. And the key here is Washington's left guard, right? Their left guard has been the weak link on the offensive line. He has to be really good. If he does not have a good game, Texas is going to get a ton of pressure because, again, Texas's studs are in the interior of that defensive line. So if he's getting exposed inside, it's going to be an issue, not just against the run, but in getting pressure and blowing up plays. The third thing that I think is an issue for Washington here is turnovers. And I do think Quinn Ewers turns the ball over too, but Penix has thrown at least 1 interception in 6 of his last 8 games. Those include 2 picks against a really bad Arizona State defense, 1 terrible interception that almost cost them a game against Stanford, and a bad interception against Wazoo in their final regular season game. On the other side, Texas's defense, 5th in the nation in takeaways. They have been outstanding turning teams over. Remember Alabama forced Milroe into 2 bad interceptions, changed the game. Gave Texas a chance to win that game going away. They're also defensively, just from an overall metric standpoint, they're 2nd in the country in third down conversion rate, allowing just 26.5% of third downs to be converted, and they're 3rd in the nation in red zone defense, allowing just 71.4% of drives to score inside the red zone. So again, to me, the path for Washington is simple. You play really, really fast, you try to get Texas burnt out defensively, and you hope you can force Quinn Ewers into some big mistakes. I don't see that happening. I think the gap is too big from Texas's offense to Washington's defense. When I initially looked at this game, I thought Texas was going to win it by 3 because Texas tends to choke games away. But the way Texas has trended has been up. The way Washington has trended, with the exception of the Pac-12 championship game, has been down. I was not big on Oregon all year, so I'm not that impressed with that win. Call me a homer. Call me whatever you want. I like the Horns in this one to win by double digits. I think Texas wins it by 10. Hook 'em. We will see you on Monday night for the Sugar Bowl as well as the Rose Bowl. And that's all I got here for this big game breakdown. Hook 'em, go Longhorns, and we'll see who ends up in the national championship game on Monday night.